Holy Spirit. Amen. Friends, please be seated. Have any of you ever had a bad day? Perhaps even a bad week or a bad month or even a bad year. Don't know why that happens, but it just seems to be the way the world works sometimes, doesn't it? Despite your best efforts, it seems like nothing you're going to do is going to go right for that period of time. And terrifyingly, secretly, you wonder, will it be a while before things start going right again when I do them? That can be tough. But everyone, from the holiest person you've ever met to the most scandalous person you've ever met, goes through those periods. It's natural when change is afoot or things don't seem to be going the way I would want them to go. I get really nervous about that. I like to be in control and to sit in the driver's seat, don't you? Man plans and then God laughs. It's so hard. But the people in the Bible, they seem so much better and holier than we are, don't they? But they experienced this too. You've got kind of two pictures in the Old Testament and the New Testament lesson for today. You've got, on one hand, the people of Israel, and on the other hand, Jesus and his disciples. Now, picture Israel for just a moment. These are people who've been enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. And God is going to set them free. And so God does set them free from slavery. And he brings them to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's army's marching up behind them to execute them all. And what does God do? He parts the waters of the Red Sea. Israel crosses on dry land. And then the water swallows up Pharaoh and his army. They are then 15 minutes onto the other side of the Red Sea. And what does Israel start asking? Moses, are we there yet? How much longer is this walk going to go? I'm hungry and I've got to go to the bathroom because no one used the restroom before they crossed the Red Sea. And then they said, oh, don't you remember the leaks we had in Egypt? Well, I've had leeks, and I can tell you, they're not that nice. Like, no one just wants leeks for dinner, right? And then to top it all off, they asked Moses, weren't there any graves we could be buried in Egypt? But no, you bring us to the desert to die and be buried. Imagine it, 400 years of slavery, you're finally free, and yet deeply, profoundly unhappy about it. And there they go, marching off through the desert for a spell. And then the Lord appears to Moses. And while Moses is with God, what do the people of Israel decide to do? Well, they collect all their gold and they throw it into a fire, and out pops a calf. No, they didn't just take their gold and put it into a fire. Secretly, they built a mold in the shape of a calf. Then they put their gold into it, and then they melted it in a fire, and out came a calf. What should we do with this miraculous calf that's appeared? Let's worship it. Not the guy who brought us out of slavery, but this little calf we made. So Moses comes down, and he's shining with this white light. There's even a fancy scholarly word for it. It's called the Taboric light. And Moses has got it. It's the light of God reflected off of Moses. And it's so bright and beautiful and powerful that Moses wears a veil over his face to protect Israel from the light. Now, on the other hand, we have Jesus and his disciples. Now, these men were faithful people, like really holy people. They had quit jobs and left their families to go and to walk with Jesus. For 3 years, every day, they walked and talked with him every sleeping and waking moment. They were physically with Jesus. But do you know what he started to tell them about? Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. And he told them that they were going to go to Jerusalem together, and at Jerusalem he would be arrested and beaten and mocked and spit upon and crucified. And all of a sudden, the disciples were not so sure this is really what they wanted. I think they too must have forgotten to use the restroom before heading off to Jerusalem. But then they go to the mountaintop with Jesus. And what do they see? They see the unbridled light of God. Not the Taboric reflected light like from Moses, but Jesus Christ himself, the true light of the world as he actually really is, and is transfigured before their eyes. So what's the difference between the disciples and Israel? Why were the disciples able to see it and not Israel? Both sets Jews, both sets God's chosen people, both sets freed by God, one from Egypt, the others from the power of sin and death. The disciples had something Israel didn't. They had Jesus. See, the disciples were focused on Jesus. They were focused on God himself and doing his will. And by being focused on Jesus, tough things can happen. Remember, Jesus goes to Jerusalem where he is arrested and beaten and spat upon and mocked and crucified. But when you focus on Jesus, Easter is always coming. This week is Ash Wednesday, and you will come forward and you will be reminded with the big smudgy ashen cross that remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Things will be tough and you will die. But the good news is this. No matter how tough or bumpy things get, no matter how hard or scary it seems, that if we focus on Jesus, things will be okay. Because we serve the crucified and risen Lord who can never die again. If you focus on Jesus, things will be okay. Because he promised to Noah and Noah's family that he would see them through the flood. And then you know what he did? Saw them through the flood. He promised to Abraham and Sarah that God's covenant and promise would be fulfilled through their own child. And in their 90s, do you know what happened? God gave them a child and fulfilled that promise. Imagine becoming a new parent at 90. This is the same God who Paul writes to us in Corinthians about, was died and buried, in whose death and burial you partook in your own baptism, so that if you die a death like his, you will be raised to a new and unending life like his. Things can get tough, but no matter how bad it gets, if we focus on Jesus, things will be better than fine. Because whatever's going on in your life, Jesus has totally got it in control. Amen. Amen.